The National Development Team for Inclusion is a social change agency, and we work to promote inclusion and equality for people who risk exclusion and who need support to lead a full life. So we work around older people's issues, mental health, learning disabilities, children and young people. In terms of our other work around on mental health, we work around personalisation, personal budgets, working with service providers to promote inclusion. The focus of my talk today is going to be on older people. And what I'm going to do is explore, I'm going to set the scene briefly in terms of the issues we are dealing with. I'm going to explore some common experiences and trends, because one of the things that we found is when we talk about older people's mental health, people start talking about dementia, or they start talking about isolation and loneliness. These are important issues, they need a focus, but we also need to focus on the more common mental health problems that older people struggle with and need help and support with. I'm going to talk briefly about age discrimination and how that plays itself out in older people's lives. And then I'm going to talk to you about what can help older people to live well, including them having a voice that's heard and acted upon, having a vision around what good mental health for older people looks like, and what good practice looks like, be it in communities, at commissioning level, at service provider level. So, if we can start with some scene setting. Mental ill health in later life isn't a natural consequence of aging. Significant numbers of older people experience serious and ongoing problems which are undiagnosed and untreated. I think it would be fair to say that generally there are low expectations at all levels, including amongst older people and their families. So we won't ignore that. And older people have poor experiences of support. I was talking to an older man recently who said to me, "I'd rather die than use older people's mental health services." Now that needs some kind of examination. He was a man who'd grown older with mental health problems, so he was graduating from adult services to older people's services, and how overnight his access to services that he was getting suddenly stopped, and he was kind of struggling as to why that might be. A number of recent studies have pointed to persistent age discrimination in mental health services. These are the three most recent pieces of work or studies, but we can go back a lot further in finding evidence of age discrimination in health and social care. So that's something that I will say a bit more about a bit later on. As I mentioned earlier, there seems to be little awareness or understanding of the profile of mental ill health amongst people aged 65 and over. And the current focus in policy and practice is on dementia. That's right and proper, but other conditions and awareness and understanding about them remain below the radar. I mean, I'm not going to say too much about what the reduction in public expenditure means and the impact that it has on perhaps poorly funded services as they are. I was talking to somebody over the break about changes in the landscape as far as commissioning is concerned. And my question is really, do GPs and clinical commissioning groups understand mental health, older people's mental health, and what enables people to have whole lives? It's not just about access to services, but what does a good life look like, and how can we support people to live that? The government strategy around the no health without mental health takes a life course approach. But what does that look like at a local level? How do we make sure that there are good mental health services and support for all people of all ages, including young people under 18 as well as people of working age? And actually, what does that term people of working age mean in this day and age, as people are working longer, having to work for longer? And the whole issue about personal budgets and personal health budgets, they have a real potential to provide choice and control, but are they? So that's just briefly around some of the issues that we are grappling with in older people's mental health. If we go on to look at some of the common experiences and trends, some of you in this room will know this very well. Some of you might be sitting there thinking, why on earth is she telling us something that we already know? But you'd be surprised the number of times I've had this conversation with people recently who've looked at me and said, well, what are some of the trends? What are the figures? Give us an idea about older people's mental health. So depression and anxiety are among the most common mental health problems in later life. 1 in 4 people aged over 65 live with depression, and 40% of people aged 85 or over live with debilitating depression that affects their ability to engage in daily activities. And the next kind of statistic really does floor me sometimes. So as few as 6% of older people with depression are referred to mental health services compared to 50% of those under 65, and less than 2% are referred to primary care psychological therapy. That may be changing as we speak. So there are issues about equal access, looking at what works and what doesn't work for older people. And isolation and loneliness aren't the only causes for depression in later life. That there are many factors: family life, family history, bereavement, grief, physical ill health, and we can't underestimate the impact that has. And people simply coming to terms with particular phases in later life. So I'm going to share some more trends and experiences. Excessive use of alcohol is a risk factor of depression, but alcohol abuse amongst older people is more likely to be overlooked and less likely to be taken seriously. Why is that? And it's a question, I'm quite curious about that. 20% of people aged 85, 65 and over develop psychotic symptoms by the time they're 85, which aren't a precursor to dementia, but they're often mistaken for dementia. I often hear people talking about older people as I go up and down the country, and the reason given for people's behaviour is dementia, and we have to kind of really unpick that. And it seems to me that all things concerning older people lead to dementia. We know that depression is strongly linked to physical ill health and disability, yet as few as 10 to 12% of older people living with 2 or more long-term conditions are treated for depression. And the next point must be the best kept secret ever. People aged 65 and over have the highest suicide rate for women and second highest for men. Those who self-harm are at particular risk. There are other trends and experiences around eating disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, but those are some of the key sort of figures and experiences and trends that I wanted to share with you today. I'm going to move on briefly to talk about age discrimination and how that wittingly or unwittingly can play itself out in society generally and in decisions that are taken on behalf of older people. This month, 1st of October, saw the ban on age discrimination in services come into effect. I wondered how many organisations were actually prepared for that. In a review of age discrimination in health and social care in 2009, mental health was one of the 3 key areas highlighted as a priority for attention. We recognise that mental health isn't just about health and social care, but it's a key part. And I think for us it's also about looking at age discrimination generally in society, in other service areas as well. And one of the key recommendations of that report, the age review, was that every provider and commissioner of mental health services will need to look at how to achieve non-discriminatory, age-appropriate services, drawing on good practice, sources of good practice. The links that are on that slide is a tool that we produce for the Department of Health, an age equality toolkit, along with criteria that providers and others can look at around primary health, secondary health, and access, diagnosis and assessment. We worked with health and social care communities in the Midlands to help them to undertake an audit of mental health services. And a report of that work is available on our website. It's called A Long Time Coming. And older people were part of that audit. So clearly age discrimination is vital to think about and address when we are looking at older people's services and commissioning decisions. So I've identified some of the trends, the figures, the piece about age discrimination. What can help and what's missing really is a shared vision about how best to support older people with mental health problems. Clearly strong leadership to develop, test and implement a new vision for age equal services and what those look like. I've talked about commissioning, and here we're talking about imaginative commissioning, focusing on good life outcomes for older people as determined by them. And I was talking to somebody over the break about, not just commissioning more of the same, but some quirky services, small-scale services. A lot of micro providers are currently providing based on what people want. Clearly responsive and personalised services and support based on older people's priorities and aspirations, which focus on well-being and recovery. And age-aware services, irrespective of how they're organised, whether it's specialist services or generic. But what do age services that are age-aware actually do? What do they look like? Peer support is something that older people say really helps. It helps reduce the stigma and isolation that they face. Again, welcoming and inclusive neighbourhoods and communities where older people with mental health problems have a positive role. They're seen as equal citizens living within those communities. What else can help? A range of psychological therapies that provide insight and strategies. And older people having a voice and choice and control of their treatment and support so they can continue to live well. And I've already talked about having a focus on recovery, irrespective of symptoms, which gives older people can really discover a positive sense of identity. Somebody talked earlier about the things that really help people and the New Economic Foundation and the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. I mean, I think that can apply to any age group. Clearly we need to increase awareness of and understanding and shift in attitudes towards mental ill health in later life. And the what do you expect at your attitude has to be addressed. And I don't make that up. I mean, like older people, only recently I was talking to a group of older people who say they hear that quite often. And older people tend to internalise some of those attitudes themselves. Tackling stigma and discrimination, so that's discrimination in mental health and age discrimination. Some of the work that the Time to Change campaign is doing is helpful here. We're working in 2 sites in England, London and Leicestershire, to develop older people's confidence and capacity to influence change. So making older people with mental health problems more visible, developing their leadership skills so that they're able to take control, they're able to influence what goes on locally in terms of services, but also in their own lives. Clearly, personalisation is very important and can help as long as it focuses on people and their hopes and aspirations, not processes and budgets. And finally, sharing and learning from what works. So what I've done there is briefly provide the C in what we're in terms of older people's mental health, some of the common trends and experiences, age discrimination and tools and resources that exist to help us to think about age equal, age aware services, and outline some headlines around what can and does help older people to have good mental health and to live well in their communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful. It's good to give us a focus, I am sure. Can I just like to ask a question, pose a comment? There's a lot of issues there. I think you were sort of giving us a steer to dementia is really, really important, but there are other parts of the issue here that we need to be thinking about, depression and anxiety. That I wasn't aware of all the, well, come to you just one second here, I wasn't aware of all the data and the figures we put out. I'm sure I'm not alone. I think sometimes it can be very important to do the message of the equal access issues was a bit staggering. People over 65 years who don't get access to the services when they have a depression and anxiety. But what are the main causes of that? And apart from the last slide that you put out about the sort of things we should start doing, what should we do about that? Well, the main causes of unequal access to services, very low numbers of people with mental health problems over age 65 don't get access to services.
I mean, I think data is key, and there is data out there, but it isn't always easily accessible to people. And I think the toolkit that I mentioned sets out quite clearly the criteria that we need to think about when we're looking at issues of equal access. So when we did the work in the 2 health and social care communities in the Midlands, what we were able to do with them is find data. So we have a data board back at branch who was able to look at national and local data and to kind of make sense of them. So I think meaningful data is quite helpful. That can actually give us a picture about what's going on, but also talking to older people themselves about their real experiences and when accessing, trying to access services. So I think, and doing an audit of the situation to see, and most importantly, having an action plan to take forward.
Yeah, lovely. And also the high suicide rate, particularly with women over age 65, needs to concern us all. Let's have a look at the suicide prevention strategy to ensure that's got focus. So, question here.
You just got comments. One is.
Could you say who you are, where you're from?
Hi, John Lyon, Service User Involvement Worker for West London Mental Health Trust in Hounslow. Just a couple of things is, I think, first thing I want to say is, I think with older men, as in men of all ages, are often very reluctant to go to seek help, go to see a doctor. And therefore, and when they're older, probably suffer in silence, unless they've got a supportive partner or family who maybe have to drag them kicking and screaming to seek help and support. The other thing I was going to say was personalisation is, I think we do have such a long way to go with personalisation, because in my area, people hear about the word bandied about a lot, and in theory it's a good thing, in inverted commas, but when it actually comes to people being assessed, if they assess personalisation. So many don't meet the criteria, or that health professionals seem to try and dissuade people. I hear this anecdotally, or even bothering to fill in the forms because they just won't get it. So I don't know if anyone would like to take that up or comment on that. That's a big challenge, I think, with personalisation and direct budgets overall.
Okay, Meena, would you like to just quickly talk about, but thanks for your comment about the men as well and access. While the microphone's going to the back, please, there's a question there. Do you want to say anything about personalisation?
Well, our organisation has done a fair bit of work around personal budgets and take up for older people, people with mental health problems. So you might want to kind of look at the work we've done on our website. But I think you're right. We do have a long way to go. Can I just pick up on the issue about older men? And I don't know whether I was talking to a chap who runs men's sheds. Some of you may be familiar with them. So this is men's sheds. Men, apparently men like sheds, which is great. And it's a movement that started in Australia, I think. But there are certainly a number of sheds set up for older men in this country. There's one in Camden, and I was talking to the gentleman who runs that, and he said something really interesting was that quite a few of the men who go to the shed actually have mental health problems but have never talked about them or acknowledged them. He talked about one man actually being suicidal, feeling suicidal, and he's convinced that actually being part of going to the shed and being part of a group along with other men, where they're not talking but doing activities, really helped him. So I think there's a huge issue about older men and how we kind of get them to open up a bit more.
Thank you very much. One final question at the back there. Let's say you asked, do you have a shed?
I don't have a shed, but I've heard of the scheme and I think it works very well. Two issues really. The first is that in terms of the change with removing barriers to ageism, unfortunately we are a core funded service, and our age cut-off is from 18 to 65. We've had many approaches from the local cancer service to take youngsters from the transition team between the age of 16 to 18, but we simply cannot do. We can't afford to do it, much though we'd like to. By the same token, we're very reluctant to boot them out at the age of 65, but very often we can encourage them to stay on as volunteers and peer support workers. So we kind of slide them into the back door and manage to keep them under our umbrella. The second thing is that I've been at two forums, fora recently, last week in fact, with clinical commissioning groups, because as a voluntary organisation we actually provide core services to people with mental health issues. The first forum was to do with engaging with voluntary organisations like ourselves, and the CCGs had absolutely no idea how to do it. And the second is that it's all very well having innovative commissioning, but the bottom line is it still has to be competent commissioning. And I have grave concerns that, with the greatest respect to GPs, they don't know enough about mental health issues because they always signpost and point on, and they do not know at the moment, in the new world, where to signpost and point on to.
Well, I think I agree with everything you say. It's more of a comment really. Do you want to pick up on that? Well, I think I'll tell you that I've got a technique for this one. We're moving on now to Rebecca Cotton from the NHS Confederation, and although it's about providers, I know that your providers, well, they're interacting with commissioners all the time. You have a view on commissioning, I do as well. So we'll return to that after Rebecca's. Can we just thank Meena one more time?